Hello, everybody. Nice to see a great turnout for this evening's event. Thank you for joining us. This is actually a very special evening for Higher Purpose Forum because for the first time, we're co-hosting a gathering, one of our presentation discussion meetings with HJ International Graduate School. And we're very grateful to have the president of the graduate school here with us, Dr. Walsh, who's going to offer closing comments at the very end, and he'll be a member of the audience up until then. I'd like to start today's meeting with a prayer, and it'd be great if Margaret Sesserson, Margaret, do you feel like praying this evening? If you could put your mute on or off.
Sure.
Thank you, Margaret.
Join me in prayer. Can you hear me now?
Loud and clear. Oh, we lost her.
Good
Yes.
morning, our loving Heavenly Parent. I think you better ask someone if my mic is not working.
We can hear you
very well.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good morning, our loving Heavenly Parent. We are so grateful to be in the gathering of our brothers and sisters from all over the world to hear this very important presentation this morning, illuminate our minds, deepen our hearts, so that we can do what we're asked to do in our different missions all over the world. All these things I offer in the name of true parents, Jesus, and in our family names. Adieu and amen.
Amen. Thank you, Margaret. That came across loud and clear. We appreciate your opening prayer. And I'm going to start by putting today's program up on the screen so we know what the game plan is for this evening. All right. Can you all see that? We're going to start the program by a welcome from Stephen Boyd, who's one of the deans of HJ International Graduate School of Peace and Public Leadership. Very happy to be able to introduce our program that way. I will give a very quick introduction to Higher Purpose Forum, and then our main speaker this evening is Dr. Gordon Anderson. He recently wrote a book, one of the several books he's written. The one published this year is titled Integral Society, and his talk tonight is based upon that book. And the talk this evening is titled Individual Sovereignty and Social Institutions. And then following Dr. Anderson will be a brief response from Dr. Thomas Sellover. Oh, I've missed something on here. After Dr. Sellover, we're going to have about between 20 and 30 minutes of conversation, of discussion. It's a very important part of our Higher Purpose Forum meetings is the comments from our audience, from you. I apologize, it's not, for some reason I left it out of this agenda, but it's certainly part of the program. We'll probably start that conversation about 8:05. At the end of the conversation, we will hear closing comments from Dr. Thomas Waltz, the president of HJ International Graduate School. So with that having said, I'd like to ask if Dean Boyd could welcome us.
Thank you very much, Jim. I really appreciate the opportunity to join together with you and all the members of your team, as well as our staff from HJI. This is a special opportunity that we have as an institution to work together with the Higher Purpose Forum. I know that you have been doing wonderful work in terms of the topics that you've covered, the speakers that have been invited, and the discussions that you've held are very important. And we're proud to be a part of your work. I know that in past events, faculty members from HGI have been present, and we hope that based on today's program, we can continue to look to the future for other future cooperative efforts. So as Jim explained, my name is Stephen Boyd. I'm the Dean of Enrollment Management and Student Life at HJI. My pleasure to welcome everyone here tonight. I was so happy to hear Margaret's prayer, simply for the fact that she said good morning, which reveals to us that we have an audience from all over the world. Here in the New York area, it's evening. It's a little after 7 in the evening. but wherever you are, we're very pleased and proud that you could come and join us today. HJI, as you know, formerly UTS, has been undergoing some important transformations based upon our True Mother's guidance. And so we're very grateful to be able to take part in this forum. As Dean of Enrollment Management, I can't help but to say something about our programs of study and invite any of you who might be interested in studying with us, even to take one course, to do so. I will be putting in the chat, Jim, if it's okay, my contact information and links to places on our website I think that might be of interest to our audience tonight. So thank you to you, Mr. Edgerly, and also to the Higher Purpose Forum and your team for having us here tonight. We really look forward to this evening's event and to future activities. Thank you so much, and God bless everyone.
Thank you, Dean Boyd. Appreciate that introduction. I'm going to go back to our agenda now. Can everybody see my screen now? All right, I'll do
Yes.
a quick introduction to Higher Purpose Forum. Higher Purpose Forum is a 501c3 organization formed 4 years ago. It is an independent educational project of unificationism. We explore and disseminate new future-facing, God-centered solutions to challenging contemporary issues based on the ideas and ideals of unificationism. We understand a higher purpose can be fulfilled when it is based upon investment in complementary and synergistic relationships. Therefore, Higher Purpose Forum seeks solutions that advance shared values, mutual prosperity, and interdependence. And this perspective that guides our conversations, and this method is sometimes referred to internally as headwing ideals, and it is based upon the teachings of the founders of unificationism, Reverend Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon. And we have a steering committee, which I want to thank. I'm sure that quite a few of them are here, that most of them are here this evening, and a number of people who help us on a regular basis to develop Higher Purpose Forum. A special thanks to Zachary Oliver, Roger Witherall, Jeffrey Kingsley, and my pastor, Catherine Ono. The 4 areas where we've been focusing our development of our ideas is first area is America's story. I'd call it America's providential history. The title of our content on that is America's Story, What's the Holdup? Our second emphasis has been on understanding the contemporary distortions of our society and the need for an awakening. And those 2 topics are both prepared for public presentation. We do get invited, and I'd like to increase that to give public presentations on those 2 topics. We're also developing content on economic democracy and on principled foreign policy. We have upcoming meetings on November 7th. That should say not 27th, but 7th. Alan Jessen will be speaking on economic democracy, talking about solutions that focus on broader distribution of ownership. Beverly Byrne and Leslie Rigney will discuss a very challenging topic, which I've had on the screen here for a long time, but we haven't ever actually, we got to do this sometime soon on the issues of abortion, principled considerations on the issue of abortion. David Wolfenberg talk about raising a family in a pornified, the challenge of raising a family in a pornified world, a pornified culture. And we're thinking about Higher Purpose Forum. Probably on our own, we'll try to do have a meeting on the issues right now confronting Israel and Gaza. So we have a few ground rules. I'm going to go through these really quickly. Please be respectful that today's participants are not just unificationists. They're definitely not. There's people here from various faiths and perspectives, so let's try to stay away from using inside lingo. Your comments during our discussion are a very important part of this program. Please use the Zoom function to raise your hand so we can call on you in order, I hope, and then unraise your hand after you've made your comment. And we ask that when you make your comments that you focus your comments on the content that has been presented and make your points succinctly so we can leave time for others to speak. And please, of course, try to remain muted throughout the meeting except for when you're speaking during our discussion. The contents presented today are not necessarily the views of Higher Purpose Forum. If you prefer not to comment in person, which they will be recorded, you could just send your comments to us. You could send them to me, Jay Edgerly at higherpurposeforum.org. And this meeting is being recorded, and we'll try to end no later than 6:30. Excuse me, 8:30. Our speaker tonight is Gordon Anderson. We've been very grateful. Gordon has been a respondent several times in recent meetings, and now we've asked him to actually present his book. Gordon earned his PhD in philosophy of religion at the Claremont Graduate University and is the president of Paragon House Publishing. Previously, he was an adjunct professor at UTS and the California Institute of Integral Studies and editor-in-chief of the International Journal on World Peace. Gordon has a long experience with the analysis of major political systems. He is the author of many articles and books, including Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness, version 4.0, and Integral Society, Social Institutions and Individual Sovereignty, which was published by Paragon House this year. And since 1999, he's been a board member of the Minnesota Legislative Evaluation Assembly and served as president from 2007 to 2011. And here's the cover of his book, Integral Society, which is now available on Amazon Books. I bought a copy myself and read it in preparation for today's meeting. So we'll end there. And I thank you, Dr. Anderson, for taking the time to meet with us, and would like to ask you to share with us your presentation.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will not be discussing my book per se, although the ideas, many of them are in the book, but I've tailored this discussion to dovetail with unification thought, since that is one of the purposes of the Higher Purpose Forum. I'll get right into my slide presentation. I think everyone can see that.
Yes.
Okay. Individual sovereignty and social institutions. Individual sovereignty is a prerequisite for the ideal society described in Divine Principle. Sovereign individuals are perfected individuals that embody God's love, become true owners, form true families, create an ideal world. And this sovereignty has never been fully achieved because individuals have been dominated internally through unperfected consciousness and externally by rulers and social institutions that control individuals that they are supposed to serve. The last 500 years, we have seen a gradual emergence of individual sovereignty from serfdom and feudal society. Self-direction centered on God, encouraged by the Protestant Reformation, freed individual thought from control of the church. Widespread ownership of land and businesses at the US founding enabled everyone to secure economic autonomy and escape from feudal society. And this created the foundation for self-governance that freed individuals from domination by kings and feudal lords. And individual sovereignty has expanded more widely to other countries until 1960s, when the world was prepared for a higher truth to enable individual perfection and true ownership that could usher in an ideal society. I think unificationists will recognize those ideas. However, evil social forces have been striking back. The assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, and others have been attempts to stop the advance of individual political sovereignty. The repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act and the unethical practices of financial investment firms, brokerage houses like BlackRock, and central banks have led to the decline of personal economic sovereignty. And the movement to censor and cancel people who oppose the orthodox truth of elites is an attempt to stop the pursuit of truth by sovereign individuals. Today, we are experiencing the rise of neo-feudalism that has many parallels to the rise of feudalism that was born out of the collapse of the Roman Empire. Free speech was replaced by official church doctrines enforced by the state. This is at the end of the Roman Empire. Widespread ownership of personal property, farms, and businesses was replaced by consolidated ownership by elites, causing the disappearance of independent middle classes. Individuals had no say in the governance of society. So in our current society, social institutions designed to serve individual sovereignty have been hijacked and used as instruments of exploitations of individuals and are involved in creating this neo-feudalism. History is, in a sense, repeating itself, but through a new and more complex set of social institutions than existed in the Roman Empire. I wrote Integral Society to analyze and discuss solutions and prevent the further rise of this neo-feudalism and to return social institutions to their purpose of serving individual sovereignty. And the ideas presented in the following slides are grounded in this book, and I will show how they harmonize with divine principle. So defining individual sovereignty. The sovereignty in individual involves self-ownership, the concept of property in one's own person. The U.S. Declaration of Independence declares individuals have a natural right to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. The U.S. Constitution is a document for a government deriving power from sovereign citizens. The government is the servant. In other words, an individual owns himself or herself, but a state does not own itself. The unification view. Unification thought axiology explains that each person is an individual truth body of infinite value because of God's absolute love. The divine principle explains that human beings were created in the image of God and are thus co-creators. God created the physical world as a home for human beings to enjoy. God also created spiritual beings, angels, as servants. Human beings are both stewards of creation and creators of new things like buildings, social institutions, and technological devices. The divine principle teaches that the angel Lucifer, created as a servant, usurped dominion. This is called reversal of dominion and has been passed on in the fallen world. The false sovereign Satan became Lord over humans. Social institutions and technology are human creations for the purpose of serving sovereign individuals. However, they also get usurped and claim sovereignty over individuals, often with the help of lies, just like the Lucifer story in the Garden of Eden. Social institutions like governments, banks, and universities should be servants of sovereign individuals, not reverse dominion. Now, I've got 3 slides here providing a quick overview of Integral Society in a schematic form. It's based on Ken Wilber's work and some of my own, and maybe one of our first ICUS professors, Edward Haskell. In the 4 quadrants here, in the upper left, we have the individual interior and the individual exterior on the right. That's the mind-body relationship. But then in society, we have what social interior and social exterior, which is the social consciousness or the principles that guide the institutions and the institutions and other things that we create. Now, Wilber has this theory. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you can just see from the beginning when the cosmos was created at the Big Bang at the center there, we've had in these 4 quadrants the evolution of the development of things, of individual personal consciousness, the individual evolution of institutions, and collective consciousness. And these on the lower 2 quadrants, we can further divide the complexification of society in the left quadrant with political, economic, and cultural principles and corresponding political, economic, and cultural institutions. There's 3 spheres of society, which I have just referred to, have been developed first I noticed it was in the work of Rudolf Steiner, designer of the Waldorf schools, and I believe Tom Sellover might know something about these schools. Steiner's term for his theory was Dreigliederung des Sozialen Organismus, or the threefold structuring of a social organism. Formulation that highlights this organicist conception of society underlying the doctrine. The theory of social threefolding holds that society consists of three autonomous branches: the economic, political, and cultural sphere. And these spheres we can further understand by studying Friedrich Hayek, who argued that there are spontaneous social orders that develop in all types of human society and all stages of social evolution. These primary spheres of society are based, and these things evolve in any community, from the most primitive to the most recent. Language, money, and law. Language and money and law refer to culture, economy, and governance. These three social spheres are based on three human social functions that are as necessary for human social integrity as eating and sleeping for biological integrity. We need to communicate feelings, ideas, knowledge, search for truth, beauty, and goodness. In the economic sphere, money spontaneously arises from the need to find, produce, and exchange necessities, goods, and services to live. In the governance sphere, spontaneously arises a social need for rules and laws so that people know how they can live in relation to one another. We see this also in divine principle. And let me just quote here, seen from the viewpoint of the providence of restoration, this era is divided into three periods. This is the last 400 years. The period of religious reformation, the period of struggle between religion and ideology, and the period of maturity of politics, economy, and ideology. That's my focus. So we've got three underlying principles of the three spheres. We've got pursuit of truth, beauty, and goodness, the use of natural resources for food and exchange. And in the governance sphere, the government should act as a referee, enforcing the laws that humans agree on. It shouldn't be a player, but I say a referee. In Christian thought, in the 20th century, we have Paul Tillich and Reinhold Niebuhr discussing this relationship in terms of the principles of love, power, and justice. Those of you who have had seminary might have read some of their books. And divine principle discusses the process of restoration in terms of the three social spheres this way. The three stages of revolution, covering the three fields of religion, politics, and industry, which followed the three stages of Renaissance in the period of preparation for the advent of the Messiah, are the necessary course for the realization of the ideal society in accordance with the three stages of the law of development. So we definitely talk about these three spheres in the divine principle. And this individual sovereignty in the three spheres require the freedom of individuals to communicate, exchange, sell goods, and have governance over their own life, self-determination. In the divine principle, I want to quote, just as democracy was brought about in order to break down the dictatorial sovereignty of the absolute monarchic society, so the Christian democracy came in order to tear down the dictatorial sovereignty of the Pope, who was proceeding apart from God's will. Likewise, the heavenly side is trying to realize the principle of coexistence, co-prosperity, and common cause after going through socialism in order to break down the imperialistic system of the economy in which state property is monopolized by certain individual or class, and to establish a system of economy in which all people may equally enjoy wealth. So just briefly here, feudalistic institutions after the Roman Empire. The church was sovereign. It determined the values and the doctrine and salvation. In the political sphere, the king was sovereign. King makes laws, citizens must obey. In the economic sphere, feudal lords and church fiefdoms are sovereign. They control land, money, and monopolies. They own their serfs' property, and monks and nuns take vows of celibacy and poverty. And the course of the last 500 years from feudalism to individual sovereignty occurred in three spheres with the Protestant Reformation, religious freedom. Political sphere, we had self-governing individuals can create a government, and the king is elected as the administrator or president. We have political freedom. In the economic sphere, at the US founding, most individuals and families owned land, houses, farms, and shop. It was nearly what you could call economic democracy because 95% of the economy was based on the individual labor of each person. Now, today we are watching new social institutions displace the sovereignty of individuals. We see the mass media and universities control official knowledge and culture. And we see opposing thought and independent media is being persecuted and censored. In the political sphere, political parties and administrative states now determine the law. Individuals are shut out of the process of Republican forms of governance as lobbyists use political parties to create the laws. And in the economic sphere, we have government central bank control cabals that control the wealth by printing counterfeit, what I would call counterfeit official money. Wealth is transferred from middle classes to monopolists and new economic lords through this counterfeiting process, which parallels the process that went on at the decline of the Roman Empire. In communist system, all three of these spheres are directly controlled by the government. Totalitarianism, while fascism and neo-feudalism represent cabals between social institutions. But in any case, either case, individuals are not sovereign. Now, here's a slide from Thomas Cromwell's presentation a few weeks ago on social institutions in Edward Haskell's unified theory. I would just like to bring this up not only because Haskell was the leader of the first ICUS, but Thomas is and I think Wilbur maybe studied some from Haskell. At any rate, an important point he made is that elites and the majority of sovereign individuals need to have the right relationship. And this line with A in the middle, this diagonal line, shows he's got this formula for all the different kinds of relationships, but a plus-plus relationship would be a positive relationship between minorities and the majority. In other words, where elites are serving individuals, and that would lead to the omega or the ideal society. So we now live in a world of these complex social institutions, and elites that lead these institutions have a responsibility to ensure their institution optimally performs its task in serving citizens. For example, a central bank system should optimally function to serve distribution of money. This is what Alan Jessen will be talking about next time. Each social institution belongs to a social sphere and should be limited to specific tasks in that sphere, rather than trying to take over, like the government trying to take over the economy or trying to take over the culture. It's like the brain trying to take over the heart or the liver. We have individual evil, and we also need to talk about institutional evil. Up to the present, religions have taught about the behavior and character of individuals. However, there needs to be a set of teachings related to social institutions. In political philosophy, individual sovereignty can be maintained by limiting the scope of government to specific purposes, employing checks and balances. Such institutional philosophy is necessary for all institutions, political, economic, and cultural. For example, checks against economic monopolies on truth. And I suggest we develop something like a 10 Commandments for social institutions. And here are some suggestions. You can read them quickly. I'm not going to dwell on each one here. So integral society, social institutions should be limited to their purpose to serve individual sovereignty, just like the organs of the human body are each limited to their purpose of serving some function to make the individual whole or integral. In the cultural sphere, everyone has equal value, the right to pursue happiness, and government should follow proven principles of culture, and elite leaders should be accountable to citizens. In the economic sphere, everyone has equal opportunity to own land, resources, and capital. Monopolies should be prevented by limiting ownership. And institutions are not primary owners, but are to be responsible to individuals who should own them. In other words, a bank should serve depositors and lenders. It should not own the deposited money. Technically today, once you put money in the bank owns it. In historical times, it just stored it for you and you continued to own it. So individual sovereignty should be restored in all three spheres. Now, briefly, I want to talk a little bit about economy, and then I'll finish. When the United States was founded, 95% of the production was by human labor. Most people farmed, had trades or shops. Each family was economically autonomous, and there was no dependence on government or banks for one's livelihood. We could call this economic democracy. And this was a condition for the United States to actually create its Republican form of democracy. Today, things have changed a lot. 95% of the production of goods uses large factories and expensive machines that require capital to purchase. This is made possible by a system we call capitalism. Capitalism has enabled strong economic growth, but the system is corrupt, with central bankers and governments printing and lending unproductive, or what I call counterfeit money, for their own purposes. And this corrupt form of capitalism does not check monopoly ownership and is creating an economic feudalism that parallels the Roman Empire. It's funding endless wars, expands government agencies, and funds lobbyist projects. The recipients of this ill-created money are buying up the property, businesses, and houses of the middle classes and employing them as becoming serfs and foot soldiers for corporations and wealthy people. And in 2015, the middle class became less than 1% of the population, one half of the 50% of the population in the United States. Bill Gates is now the largest landowner. Chinese-owned businesses may soon control the food supply chain. We no longer have widespread individual economic sovereignty to support a Republican form of democracy. Own or be owned. It's a phrase that Alan Jessen will probably use. Just capitalism and widespread ownership. I'm going to argue in favor of capitalism, not that it's bad, but that its corruption is bad. Just capitalism should end the flow of unproductive money to governments and their cronies from the central banks. A central bank would be a referee, not a player. A central bank should not lend money, should not hold reserves, should not purchase government securities or manipulate interest rates. The central bank should only manage the money supply and let all the other banks do the banking, and let the government force the government to borrow money from people who view it as a sound investment. Own or be owned too. Just capitalism would curb economic monopolies and encourage maximum competition to inhibit excessive wealth accumulation. Sovereign individuals would own the land, not social institutions. I'm actually thinking that corporations should not own land. We could discuss that later. Pure competition, infinite numbers of buyers and sellers, keeps prices low, prevents excess profits, and maximizes wealth distribution. We should limit ownership to prevent monopoly control of resources. Public utilities of water, like sewer pipes and natural monopolies, should be managed by the people. Elected officials, I do not think they should be private monopolies. And finally, public utilities should be as decentralized as possible, with each city controlling as much as it can. This enables market conditions to operate between municipalities. If one city performs bad, people can move to another city. And finally, separating all of cultural and economic institutions from the state. In the First Amendment to the Constitution, we separate church and state, because church was primarily the only major social institution at the time the United States was founded. There weren't corporations, and political parties developed as kind of a substitution for separating church and state. Yeah, I would rewrite the First Amendment to say Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion, political party, cultural association, or any other organization prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Congress shall not abridge the freedom of assembly. This leaves people with individual sovereignty. It keeps social institutions out of the act of governance and returns government to the people. There's a constant threat that leaders of all social institutions will abuse their power, misuse institutional funds, use the institution for ulterior ideological purposes, and seek government support through corrupt political processes. Hijacking social institutions is a communist goal. This is the opposite of the responsible use of institutional or public money. We need vigilance, not just over our government, but applied to all social institutions. And in my book, I provide a big picture view. I start with Sumer and Babylon and look at the development of this theme throughout history. I'm going to stop sharing there and turn it over to Tom Sellover for comments.
Thank you very much, Gordon. It's a very ambitious agenda. Not many people are willing to talk about how the U.S. Constitution should be rewritten. Could I just ask you a quick question before Thomas starts? One of the items that you mentioned there was that institutions have consciousness. They have a social consciousness, which apparently is different than individual consciousness. And I guess it's the social consciousness that you say leads institutions to threaten individual sovereignty. What is the social consciousness that you're referring to?
Well, social consciousness would be the collective view, what one might call the state of an art in school regarding to a science. That consciousness evolves in military consciousness. People originally just were killing each other. That consciousness has evolved to diplomacy, for example, over a period of time. And in the economic sphere, there are other principles where stealing evolved into buying and selling, and different types of economic institutions like banks that make economic life easier. So the consciousness in each of those institutions has a consciousness associated with its mission and the principles that allow that to happen the best. and we should try to understand them and keep them evolving properly to serve individual sovereignty.
And you're saying that indeed social consciousness within institutions was developing, and then something happened, I think you said in the 60s, which caused some kind of a regression. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it didn't just stop in the 60s, but with this end of the civil rights movement, I argue we brought individual sovereignty to its highest state, at least in the political sphere, and with Martin Luther King Jr., et cetera. And since then, you've seen people fighting back. We see now
Yes.
more censorship and other things. So in my own view, we reached kind of an apex in the early 1960s.
Interesting. A lot of people point to that time period for the end of one of probably the biggest cultural change in the history of our country began right then. For
Well,
very
you could see organizations that were fighting for Black rights, for example. The Southern Christian Leadership Foundation, which was working with Dr. King, they had to kind of redefine their mission once the civil rights have been achieved. And in so doing, they have more, in order to keep their jobs and to keep their organization going, they've kind of completed their mission, but now they are doing other things and using people to keep themselves funded and going. They're using that institutional mission for other purposes.
So the social consciousness of the institution went off track at that time.
Yeah, or the leaders hijacked it and took it off track.
Thank you.
We have to allow the hardest, Reagan once said, the hardest thing to do is shut down the government bureaucracy. They do take life on their own, and that's something we haven't learned yet.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Anderson. It was very interesting. We'd love to hear your response, Dr. Sullivan.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you, Dr. Anderson, for your presentation. I know there's a lot there for us to unpack in the discussion. I'm very glad to be able to participate in this important HPF and HJI forum. Dr. Anderson set the stage for this presentation by warning us that we're witnessing the rise of neo-feudalism. In our current society, the social institutions designed to serve individual sovereignty have been hijacked and used as instruments of exploitation of those individuals, creating a situation of neo-feudalism. So the overall framework of his concern in this presentation is that things have gone seriously wrong with our social institutions in our country, and that we have an urgent task, shared task, to set them right. I'd like to begin my response with an appreciation for the way that Dr. Anderson has linked the main points of his presentation concerning integral society with the social vision of divine principle and unification thought. I love the quotation that individual sovereignty is a prerequisite for the ideal society described by the divine principle. Sovereign individuals are perfected individuals that embody God's love, become true owners, form true families, and create the ideal world. In putting it this way, Dr. Anderson is providing unificationists with an alternative language and symbol system for discussing issues that are very central to our movement, and doing so in a way that invites all of us into the broader conversation of integral studies. So I think that is really one of the main contributions of this presentation for the unification community. Happily, Dr. Anderson addresses the changes in social institutions that are necessary to allow sovereign individuals to grow and flourish, and also to assist on the path toward the social ideals of the divine principle. I also appreciate and applaud the 10 commandments for social institutions, which passed by rather quickly, but they're very much worth noting. I would just say that it will be sovereign individuals who will be responsible to see that the institutions abide by these commandments. Now I'd like to focus on the key concept of individual sovereignty. Is it a self-evident truth in today's social context? Or have we ironically lost track of individuality? As Dr. Anderson indicates, please excuse me, I do have a cold. The starting point in developing this concept is the locus of one's own mind and body. Quote, the sovereignty of the individual involves self-ownership, the concept of the property in one's own person. An individual has bodily integrity and the exclusive control of one's own body and life. And so that point in itself could go quite far. But I'd like to ask, individuals as bearers of individual sovereignty, is that by birth, all of us, all the time? Or is there a growth process required for the individual's ability to exercise individual sovereignty? Is it, after all, an achievement concept? If there is growth and development involved, then it seems there ought to be a role for character education in the raising of sovereign individuals. Next, on the nature and source of sovereignty. In discussing the development of individual sovereignty, yeah, it's better if you're somewhere else, dear. Sorry. I apologize for that. In discussing the development of individual sovereignty in the sphere of religion and culture, the presentation gives credit to the Protestant reformers. As Dr. Anderson put it, individual sovereignty, nurtured by the Protestant Reformation and significantly on display in early American society, reveals self-responsibility, self-direction, and self-sufficiency. So I'd like to note that among the Protestant reformers, John Calvin especially emphasized divine sovereignty. And so I'd like to ask our speaker, what kind of resonance do you find between Calvin's idea in the Protestant Reformation, Calvin's idea of divine sovereignty, and the idea of individual sovereignty? In other words, could divine sovereignty be the source of individual sovereignty, as in endowed by their creator with certain and unalienable rights? Further, I wonder if Calvin's conception of divine sovereignty can provide a ground or a basis for the duties of government in an integral society, especially the duty to serve as a referee and not a player. Perhaps the divine sometimes is doing that as well. Then I want to come to the three social spheres. The three social spheres is a theme that runs throughout Dr. Anderson's presentation, even receiving support from Rudolf Steiner, the founder of the Waldorf schools. And yes, training as a Waldorf school teacher was part of what prepared me for the principal. And I would also say that the reference to Rudolf Steiner means that there could be all kinds of esoteric meaning going on in Dr. Anderson's presentation that most of us aren't aware of. Okay, from Hayek's comment that he also quotes on the ubiquity of language, money, and law in human societies, we come to recognize that culture, including religion, education, arts, and so on, economy, and politics are properly distinct spheres of human society that each have their own mission. As Dr. Anderson puts it, an integral society is based on a principled relationship between culture, economy, and governance. We can say that the key to the principled relationship is that the institutions in each sphere respect the other two and refrain from colluding with each other against the interests of sovereign individuals. The development of the three spheres of society is intriguingly portrayed in one of the diagrams, Wilbur Anderson matrix. So it's something that Dr. Anderson has been working on as well. And we could see social consciousness on the part of individuals on one side, and then social institutions as well. So I would just note, in the relationship between those two, the development of social consciousness is also fed by the integral consciousness of individuals. It's not only the result of the action of those social institutions. Otherwise, the tendency would be for social consciousness to be overly distorted by social institutions. Now, quoting Divine Principle, Dr. Anderson notes, likewise, the heavenly side is trying to realize the principle of coexistence, co-prosperity, and common cause. This is the same threefold principle that UPF promotes as interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universal values. And it also lines up with the three social spheres, economic, political, and cultural, as described in unification thought. In the original Korean, these three are Gongseng, Gongyong, and Gongwi, showing that they're related together by the concept of Gong, which would translate mutuality, sharing, community, or the co that we find in some translations, co-prosperity, coexistence, or co-living. This, I think, is an important point of interface between Dr. Anderson's presentation of integral society and the unification sources for a vision of an ideal society. Focusing on the nature of this gong in terms of shared interaction. What is the quality of interaction, of give and receive action that generates or nurtures these principal interactions, which are the root of heavenly society? This leads back to the idea of integral consciousness as arising from the relationships and interactions of integral individuals. So if we're looking for integral institutions, we need integral individuals who recognize the nature of their own individual sovereignty. This is the nexus for the generation of social institutions, and also, I take it, for getting them back on track. Then under what conditions can this kind of integral interaction be promoted? In an article on integral politics that I ran across by Elke Fein and Hans-Peter Studer, I found this highly compatible description. On the individual level, integral consciousness is able to de-identify with thoughts and feelings that go by while watching them from the perspective of a timeless observer or witness, and rather identifying with consciousness itself. Therefore, it senses the unity of all things and beings, an outlook which is able to generate a loving and compassionate attitude toward all things. That seems very positive and forward-looking. I'd like to add another suggestion, namely what I've come to call win-win-win thinking. By win-win-win thinking, I mean a kind of consciousness that envisions the benefit not only of the immediate parties, two parties in a negotiation, the common idea of win-win, but that also includes the whole purpose, or we can say the heavenly purpose. In practice, win-win-win thinking in political arrangements, as well as economic endeavors, is not only for the sake and benefit of you and me, which is a form of collusion, but also the benefit of the whole. Mutual prosperity is a threefold rather than just a twofold matter. Now, such an emphasis would lead us, an emphasis on the whole purpose, would lead us back to one of the core ideas of integral consciousness, which is that it's rooted in a view of the whole, which respects the value of each individual. So the whole and the individual are two very important components here. One more main point, the two poles of today's presentation are individual sovereignty and social institutions. So I'd like to suggest that family deserves an important consideration in this picture. Dr. Anderson notes that family is the most basic human institution, a combination of biological necessity and organized human cooperation. So family is certainly in the picture, but my suggestion would go a little bit further. that the family is distinct from the complex network of social institutions that have arisen in modern society. And with all its faults and shortcomings, the family provides a counterweight to the impersonality of the collective society, of social institutions in the economic, governmental, or cultural spheres. Indeed, it is a microcosm of those spheres. The Confucian, and I think also the divine principle view of human life, is that family has a primary role, and also that family ties or primordial ties are defining characteristics of our individuality. Each of us is interconnected with others in a complex web of familial relationships. We could not have become the people we are without the nurture of that complex web. No one can be a parent without a child, or vice versa. We are brothers or sisters, siblings, spouses in a social context, in an interactive, interrelational context. These are not just social roles that we play, but belong to the very nature of our existence and life. They are integral, I would say. We unificationists tend to say that the family is the school of love. Might it not also be the school of integral consciousness that befits our individual sovereignty? Dr. Anderson has referenced the unification thought concept of individual truth body. To go along with that, I would like to recall the equally foundational concept of connected body. Our particular identity as an individual, our very individuality, is strongly and enduringly, maybe endearingly, shaped by our connections, particularly the ties of family and friends. Before closing, I'd like to venture a further question. How would an integral approach to society deal with the legacy and history of imbalance, inequality, or injustice? The presentation highlights the virtues of early American society in terms of its ability to support the kind of integral consciousness required for the model of Republican government which the Constitution proposes and which we are trying to live up to. A serious exception, of course, was the slaveholding system, which has yet to be fully factored into our national story. In raising this issue, I'm just seeking to understand how a new integral vision for our nation, its history, and its future might indeed help us move forward. Perhaps as a partial answer, I wonder if Dr. Anderson, if you might venture a comment on your point that I've heard you make also elsewhere, that laws that give everyone an equal opportunity to own and profit from new capital are the most needed development in the 21st century. Finally, I want to close with one of Dr. Anderson's strong affirmations that we are capable of transcending inherited consciousness and the socially constructed realities in which we live, which means we are capable of recognizing the need for integral consciousness when it is pointed out, and capable of exercising individual sovereignty and advancing in that direction, both personally and also as a society. This forum itself is a step forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. You truly prepared for our meeting today, which we appreciate that investment. Dr. Anderson, I think he's put a number of questions or even challenges in front of you. Maybe before we open up for conversation, you might want to respond to some of the issues he raised. I've got a list of them, but maybe you've also...
Yeah, let's not recite the whole list because it's very long and it would preclude any discussion.
Just choose your favorites, no
To
worries.
go over them. So I just want to choose a couple of things.
Yes.
The first one is he added the dimension of divine sovereignty. And I did say something about this, that human beings are co-creators and that we are, as co-creators, we have our own sphere of creatorship, which is ultimately under God's sovereignty. So our social institutions are something that we create, in a sense like God created the angels I mentioned. And our social institutions can go awry because of freedom in much the way that Lucifer could go awry and lead us astray, which leads us to your question about growing up and learning integral consciousness in the family. Certainly we aren't born with integral consciousness. We're born with instincts, and we are shaped by the society around us, and the foremost of which is the family. And just to, mention a little bit about the family and community, we need to think in terms of impersonal and personal institutions. Personal institutions are face-to-face. We know what our neighbor needs. Impersonal institutions like governments can only abstractly deliver services. So, for example, if you want fair distribution of some economic goods, a parent knows that a certain child will need infant formula. Somebody else can use a regular glass of milk, and the grandparent is lactose intolerant. The government would give you all the same. And so governments are incapable of fair distribution. You learn fair distribution in the family through personal relationships. And it's something that you can never be completely fair unless you become omniscient. So there again, God, our life on earth is constantly trying to improve and do better, and the family is the school for that. So I think I will stop there. You mentioned many other things. I agree with most of them. A lot of them were just elaborations on what I had already said. So thank you, Tom.
Well, those are really interesting additions there, Dr. Anderson. Thank you. Well, now it's invite, I know that was challenging content, both from Dr. Anderson and Sellover. So I know it's not easy to follow up, but we do find that the best part of most of our meetings is in the conversation, give and take that follows. So very eager to start that discussion now. I hope I can see, we have a lot of, okay. I see Sunder Willett is with us. Oh, I'm so happy to see Sunder Willett. Yes, thank you for raising your hand, Sunder. If you could, we'd love to hear from you, but could you, is it possible you could put your camera on? There you are. Very good.
Hello. So going back to something specific you said about the role of central banks, I was curious what you meant by they should, I believe you said they should just manage the money supply. And I think a lot of economists would argue that that is what they're doing. And so if you take away all of the powers that you say you want to take away, how would they function? Would we functionally not have a central bank? Because in that case, there are plenty of examples of countries that do not have central banks, and they are subject to constant ups and downs in the economic cycle.
It's a very good question. I have 2 chapters in my books on banking. I found one mistake in one of those chapters, and I'm still working on the topic. But Milton Friedman argued that the primary role of the central bank should be to manage the currency, manage the money supply. The problem is that an institution that manages the money supply should not be able to use it as its own. It's a fundamental conflict of interest. It's the people's money. So banking should take place through the banks. Then the government, if the government is a referee and not a player, It could control the amount of money needed for the economy. So it's needed in fractional reserve banking because you're creating, through loans, you need to create new money and inject into the economy. So the central bank is needed for that purpose. And fractional reserve banking is needed for rapid expansion of the economy. So those two functions are important. But when you print money for government agencies and lend money to the government, or when you start the federal, when that agency becomes a player, buys up reserves, stocks reserves, buys securities, charges interest, does all kinds of things, it enriches itself and its cronies. It should be absolutely neutral and just like I live in Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't print money. Minnesota can't engage in the corruption that the federal government can. It has to balance its budget. Federal government should be held to the same standards. The person that prints the money should not be able to use it. It should just be a regulating agency.
So
I hope that helps.
the follow-up on Sunder's question, I think the issue he's raising is, can a central bank manage the booms and busts of a market economy without an activist central bank? Is that what you're saying, Sunder?
Yeah, because a lot of the powers that you're raising that you say should be taken away, like managing, adjusting interest rates, or buying up bonds from other banks, that is how it manages the money supply. And I would, I don't know, I would question whether, because at least in America, the central bank is independent from the federal government.
Yeah,
And
it's independent and corrupt. The interest that it charges, it prints money and then charges interest on it. And that interest goes to specific elites. I would argue that you print money and inject it when an individual takes a loan out on a house and new money's created. You just provide the money to the bank that issued the loan. And in that case, you wouldn't have to adjust for inflation because you wouldn't have the kind of inflation that government corruption causes in the first place. What the things you cited that our Federal Reserve is doing today is largely doing as a way to protect itself from the corruption and the fallout from the corruption that it already created.
Well, we'll have to continue this next meeting with Alan Jessen is going to be discussing the same challenge, Sunder. So thanks for raising that big.
Yeah, and Alan Jessen and I have some differences too. So that, but the overall view is why we want wide distribution and wide ownership, and individuals should be able to control their own destiny economically.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for joining us from Las Vegas. We're happy to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Incredible presentation. I feel that we're stuck in the ideal, however. Where do we begin to make changes?
What's the action step?
Correct.
Well, for me, you have to know where you're going before you can take an action step. We also have to know where we've been. We have to know where we're going. And I'm arguing that we need an integral consciousness. Wilber not only talks about integral consciousness, but post-integral consciousness and eventually divine consciousness. But our founding fathers, he argues, were at the level of integral consciousness, but most people aren't. So we need to work on that. And then I think our social institutions have evolved and corrupted one step at a time, one law at a time. we should start reversing that one law at a time.
Okay,
So-
get involved in politics.
Yeah, you're saying it's a legal a legal action plan dealing with
I
laws.
think there is a lot of laws that need to take place because the system is amok, because the framework is wrong. The founding fathers created a good framework for a different world. Since then, we've had 200 years of development of technology and social institutions, medicine, all kinds of things that they didn't foresee.
Mhm.
They just, if you follow their spirit and have checks and balances on everything and focus, ask the question every time, does this serve the sovereignty of the individual? I think you'll make a lot of progress. You look at an omnibus bill today, 95% of what's in an omnibus bill serves one lobbyist. Maybe two people benefit from the law rather than a consensus of the governed. We need to change a lot of things.
Roger,
Thank you.
I see your hand is up. Roger Weatherall from Connecticut.
Hello. Thank you. Great presentation. I've been reading your book too, so thank you for elaborating a little bit more. I think my question is a little bit of a follow-on to what Leslie was asking. A lot of this seems to be very idealistic, and I think we've gotten into the state we are today because a lot of our social institutions have been developed as a reaction to the fallen nature and the corruption and the evil that exists within man themselves. So to try and deal with these, or to try and take advantage of them in some ways. So I think a lot of what you're talking about is dependent on people being good and educated about their value and who they are and their relationship to society. And so that kind of is a precondition in order to establish these good institutions and foundations that you're discussing here. So I guess my question is, what role do you see would there exist for institutions like the police or the security forces or the military in the kind of world that you're describing? And do they need to play a role in us getting from where we are now to where we want to go?
Yes. Actually, most of our social institutions, I don't think just exist because they're serving some evil purpose, although many of them have been corrupted and are serving evil. But like communism and other things in the world, we talk about the principle of the false preceding the true. So the idea of a central bank, I argue it's a good idea. A central bank that prints money and has ethical fractional reserve banking allows economies to grow far faster than some gold standard or some other earlier form of economic system. But it's been hijacked. It's a false version that precedes the true. And I haven't thought about the policing, but I'm sure policing is necessary as people are always in growth and some order must be kept. And even people are going to have car accidents, even if there's less theft as the world progresses. But we need to make sure that the police are serving sovereign citizens, not themselves.
Wow, big challenge.
Mhm.
The biggest, I live in a very peaceful town, no crime. The biggest building in downtown Lexington, Massachusetts, is the police station. It is way out of control. That's another story. Hello, James Hughes from Maine. Thank you for joining us.
Good day. I think ours is the school. And two questions. One, can you, the definition of a sovereign individual, I didn't get the complete one. Can you, you went fast through there. It's a perfected individual who embodies God's love and becomes true owners, true families. And what was the end?
Well, I was talking about the world that developed from a sovereign individual, but a sovereign individual is somebody who owns himself, herself, and in divine principle terms has achieved the three blessings.
Okay, I thought in your first slide you had a complete definition of it, but
yes,
that's all right.
I'd have to go back to that.
No problem. My question, the other question I have is, I think Michael Novak in his book, In the Spirit of Democratic Capitalism, also saw like a tripartite, the political, economic, I think he termed it cultural. When I was at UTS in the mid 80s, we had Father Joseph Fichter. He was a sociology professor at Loyola, and I think he taught at Harvard, but UTS was his best gig, I'm sure. But I think he said there were, from a sociological perspective, there were 6 parts of society. I think there's a family, the school, the church, the business, the government, I think media. Where would those 6 fit? I mean, obviously government and business would be under that part. But
yeah, there are many institutions in what I would, in 3 spheres. So schools would be in the cultural sphere.
and religion
Banks would be in the economic sphere. The police would be in the government sphere. And you could, I think I had like 20 on that chart.
Okay.
Institutions, many for each sphere, and they should each serve their own function and act in an integral way, the way the organs of the human body serve the integral health of the human being.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And
yeah, thank you. And that gets also back to Tom Selliver's question about serving the whole, which is another function that I didn't dwell on.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Let's have a final comment from Diane Hickler, and then we'll invite Dr. Walsh to give our closing comments.
Oh, hi, Gordon. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Yeah.
I was just thinking.
Be neighbors.
I was just thinking, we all want to be in an ideal world, right? But we will keep going. We'll keep trying and keep moving forward. But I feel like our mind, it's so conditioned to a certain way that it takes awareness to turn around. And we need like what you call mind hacking. And this is the challenge, how we can hack our mind, to use a different word, a term, or even today I'm going one way. I usually go one way, but I want to go a different way. And I argue with my mind, wait a minute, this is not the way I want to go. And it argue with me, well, you never said anything new, so I was just following the old way. So we really need a good mind hack, because we don't want to stop going to find the ideal and live a true way. It's our built-in nature to be with God. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the family is so important. Culture is so important in getting us to transforming us to think and to reprogram or to change our mindset, because 95% of our behavior is socialized behavior, and only 5% may be rational. And so if you see somebody drowning in the lake, it's instinctual if you're going to jump in or not, depending on how you've been socialized. You don't sit and reason about it. And that's why we need true families, and why true families are the foundation of world peace.
Gordon, just one quick question. Maybe you could just give a real simple response. I tend to think that the great source of corruption is really corrupted the kind of society that we're meant to build is a sexual corruption. And that we're very, very far off from true divine human sexuality. I'm just wondering how your framework of building an integral society where everyone sort of maintains, individuals and institutions maintain their position and mutually respect the position of other participants like a body. That's my understanding of what you're sharing with us. How does that deal with issues such as this underlying, what I believe, issue of sexual corruption?
Well, I think I mentioned the importance of the family.
Yes.
In getting us to an integral consciousness. So if you think in terms of the sovereign individual, everyone needs to become a sovereign individual. True Father talked about rights that everybody should have: the right to love, the right to, to be loved as for a child. And sexual promiscuity and divorce prevent that from happening. And so in a sense, without proper sexual relationship, none of what we're talking about can unfold. You can't have unless in the fall, in the Garden of Eden, Lucifer tempted an Adam and Eve. They wanted to take a shortcut, in a sense, to be like God without growing up. And we want our governments to take care of us. We want our social institutions to take care of us. We want Daddy to give us a big inheritance and live off of it. None of those things are personal responsibility. They're all something childlike, still in the growth stage, that you need to work through in the family. And so, I didn't present on sexuality here, but certainly strong families are important if you're thinking of what the child, which is the product of those relationships, is going to become.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. And now I'm very happy and honored to have as our closing speaker, which will bring our meeting to an end, the president of HJ International Graduate School, Dr. Thomas Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Jim Edgerly. Great program. Thank you for putting it together and bringing Dr. Anderson to this forum so he can elaborate on his recent book. And I thank Dr. Anderson for putting that book together and his prior books that are addressing in different ways this very critical topic and thinking in a very broad way. And I thank Dr. Selliver's well thought out and very, I think, pay deep respect to Dr. Anderson by the quality of his remarks.
Yes.
Anyway, there's a lot here. I'm not going to venture in as a commentator, but you're
really... chicken, Doctor. You're chickening out.
I mean, there are a lot of thoughts that spin around, and I've scribbled notes around. I kind of had this idea of a kind of the individual, family, society, nation, world, cosmos chart or diagram that comes out of divine principle, and looking at the sovereignties in plural, that each sphere has its appropriate sphere of sovereignty that is on every level limited, albeit the individual being the most fundamental unit of all sovereignties, and that if that is corrupted, then the family, society, nation, world, and cosmos gets corrupted, but there's a certain way of thinking of sovereignty, because I think, you're touched on something that's related to the concept of rights and the dignity that human beings are endowed with or born with or given by God, although that's not in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, but that we have rights. But that has been unable to affect, because it's not linked to an integral consciousness or a restored self. So I think you're getting toward that. I applaud you for, for in a way, bridging between your unificationist background with a whole school of thought that you've found that Ken Wilber in particular as a way to kind of show the parallels. You and I and Dr. Selver studied under Young-Un Kim, and she would always show, well, there's unificationism, but it looks alien at first. But let me explain a little bit about this to you and show you how there's similarities with Origen and Calvin, and et cetera. So I think there's a lot here. I thought about the concept of subsidiarity and linked to this kind of line of sovereignties and how that was the Roman Catholic tradition, but more widely, and I know you've spoken about that too, Gordon, that each of these spheres has its own area of sovereignty, which is linked also to responsibility, the responsibilities that go with that sphere. So, and on the other side is, you were talking about love, power, and justice, and I'm wrapping up here. Love, power, and justice, and they correlate with the cultural, political, economic spheres. And it made me think about, the problem. One way to look at the problem of fallen nature, one is the sexual corruption. The other is the problem of inequality. And it's there, and it's most obviously in economics, but we, with the money, who's getting what, and it leading to the resentment, the envy, the jealousy, the political power, the inequality of power, and how that leads to political parties ruthlessly going after one another to achieve power, or one-party systems working to concentrate all the power. And in the sphere of love and appreciation, or we might say recognition, that we all want to be recognized and valued, and we see and observe and experience inequalities in that sphere that we can't quite correct. So somehow finding the way to compensate for these areas of inequality. Some of that is certainly with the reform of institutions, but also developing, this integral consciousness or this restored consciousness. But let me just close and just say that I really learned a lot. Gordon, thank you for the work you do. Not only this book, but I mean, you've been at this for 40, 50 years and have really been so steady and really presenting and I think really doing such a service to our founders through your work, and Dr. Selver as well. So I applaud you both, and the Higher Purpose Forum. And Jim, I hope we can continue. We can do more of these and talk about how we can help each other. Win-win, win-win-win, Dr. Selver. So let's do some win-win-wins.
Quadrant
Yeah.
four, looking for quadrant 4 outcomes, right, Gordon? Quadrant 4 outcomes.
Yeah, just one point is there are levels and spheres. So in addition to spheres, there's levels of society that Dr. Walsh brought up with the idea of subsidiarity. That's a whole nother dimension of integral thinking.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was a wonderful gathering. And if you have any comments, please send them to info@higherpurposeforum.org. And anything we receive from our audience will certainly be taken very seriously. Thank you, everybody.